Hey everyone. This time we looked at Chrono Trigger by Michael Williams. This is another from Boss Fight Books, and it's a really good book. In this, Michael breaks down a lot of the characters in the book, which is pretty nice. While it doesn't follow like kind of a standard format that I've seen for a lot of these books, where they have the story, but they also wrap it around with their personal narratives and everything. We don't see that, but what he does give us is sort of a pretty good understanding of the story and adds in a lot of other things to try to ground the story in what's going on in the real, or at least what was going on in the real world. It's really cool to read it, and it's a very nice way of doing things. The first couple chapters are about kind of Michael's life, his background with playing RPGs, and his thoughts on really the genre in general. He talks a lot about sort of the mid 90s when really Squaresoft was doing a really great job. He refers to them as the king of RPGs at that time. It's kind of debatable now, but definitely in the 90s they were the king of RPGs. He goes on to say that kind of as we moved into the early 2000s, he sort of started growing out of RPGs, which is kind of understandable. He was getting older at the time, he was going off to college, and he didn't really have the same amount of time to, commit to a 70-hour RPG or something along those lines. What we also get is sort of a critique of our main character, Chrono, and also a little bit of the story and how it doesn't quite fit in with a few of the stereotypical things. We do get a little bit of that in the very beginning of the story, but he talks about later on how Chrono dies and you have to go and resurrect him. And that was kind of a big deal for an RPG at this time, to kill off its main character and sort of make you try to go through the game with a bunch of other characters. It works out really well for the game. It's a little weird the way they do it, and Michael talks about that, but it's just kind of one of the fun parts of this game. Now, the character Chrono, as Michael says, he doesn't say anything. He literally has no dialogue in the game, unless you're going through and you're looking at a few of the choices that you're allowed to use. It's not really him talking, though. As Michael says, it's just sort of an answer to a question, but we don't get to see what Chrono actually said. He brings up a really good example of this in the trial scene for Chrono, where Chrono gets put on trial for kidnapping Marley, and he has to respond to a lot of the accusations against him, but it's all done through very vague text, and it's not really like a good defense of Chrono. He's just sort of throwing out random words, but he's not really, you don't really see him arguing his case. In this, and you get a rear view of Chrono, so you don't see him actually, doing any of the emotive things that his character sprite normally does whenever he acts surprised or sad or laughs, that sort of thing. So from there, Michael goes on to talk about a bunch of the other main characters in the game. And I want to focus on Magnus particularly because he's one of the two villains in this game that I think Michael has a lot of really interesting thoughts on. So Michael describes Magnus as basically being Chrono's dark side, or like a dark representation of Chrono, which makes a lot of sense because both of them are pretty driven in their goals to do things. Whereas Chrono wants to go and help everybody, Magnus doesn't care who he hurts in the path of him accomplishing his goals. You can see this through the genocidal war between the Mystics and Gardania, where I'm not even too sure Magnus wanted that war. He I think, just wanted to provide a distraction so that he could summon Lavos and kill him in his time period, and eventually find his older sister. It's a really crazy thing when you look at Magnus as a character, because I would argue he's not necessarily evil, he just only cares about himself. He's more of a selfish villain, where when you look at the other villains in the game, they're very different in their different roles. He then goes on to do more of a deep dive into Lavos, but he also brings up Mother Brain and Queen Zeal, and this part is really more of the motivations of these different villains, and this is a really great part of the book, and if you read nothing else from this, definitely look at his section where he explains Lavos and a lot of the other villains. So the first one he talks about is Mother Brain, and Mother Brain really has like a minor role in this, and it really only applies to the future, the 2300 AD, where Robo is from. And it's arguable that if you save the world, then this future may not happen and Mother Brain might not exist. But it's kind of crazy when you go through the factory in order to defeat Mother Brain, and you get there and she talks about wanting to recreate like a perfect world of robotics and logic. And that's really her motivation, and I don't and we as humans could look at it and say, yes, that's evil, you want to exterminate all human life. But from Mother Brain's standpoint, it's, I'm doing this to improve the world. I'm not trying to be evil, I'm not trying to do bad things. I'm doing this for the betterment of the planet. It's a weird and warped logic to think about, but it's the logic that Mother Brain has. Now he gets into Lavos, and Lavos is kind of a harder enemy to pin down, especially like whether it's really a bad guy or if it's just doing what it needs to survive. But he compares Lavos to Queen Zeal, and he also adds in a little bit of a little bit of literature to this, which I think is kind of interesting, and I hadn't thought about until he really brought it up. So he talks about how Queen Zeal sort of matches up with like an H.P. Lovecraft character, where she's really close to Lavos, or in the case of like a Lovecraft universe, she would like have been driven mad by Cthulhu. In this case, Queen Zeal is driven mad by Lavos. And she's probably one of the real villains in the game. Like, one of the ones that you could pinpoint as, yes, that person is absolutely evil. Because she's trying to bring about the end of the world by, getting Lavos to wake up. And it just becomes more of her, descent into madness. She even transforms into more of a monster-like character at the end of the game, instead of her, like, original human sprite. Now, Lavos, on the other hand, it's where I kind of argue it might not be a bad person doing bad things. Lavos is just kind of doing things to stay alive. Michael even points out how Lavos saved humanity by taking out all the reptites in prehistoric times, which he argues they probably would have wiped out humanity. And when you think about it, yeah, they probably would have, because humanity just lives in a bunch of huts and everything. And for some odd reason, the reptites kind of have like an industry going, and are at least able to build like pretty complex structures out of stone. So an argument could have been made that, yeah, Lavos saved humanity at the very beginning, but then started manipulating them in order to suit his needs better, which would mean Lavos engineered a way for himself to die as well. It's very weird once you get into the plot of this. So the last thing I really want to talk about in the book is two interviews that Michael includes in here with people that did translations for the SNES and for the Nintendo DS versions of the game. And he gets into a lot of like the ways that translation was done prior to really Ted Woolsey, who he interviews, where Ted Woolsey came in and really started doing like the real translation work. Because before him, and honestly before other translators came in, it was just one of the Japanese employees who happened to know English, and they did their best, but, some of them didn't really work out as well as others. Some examples of kind of bad translations are, Pro Wrestling, Zero Wing, Ghosts and Goblins, Ghostbusters, and a few times in Simon's Quest. You also get a few quotes that are supposed to be like sayings or proverbs in Japanese, and then when they try to translate them into English, they don't really work out too well. It's one of the quirks, and it's sort of, hard to actually translate into a different language. Sometimes if you're not a native speaker, or if you don't have like a really good working knowledge of that language. He also adds in here that really the history of Chrono Trigger isn't just like a plot summary or the developers that made the game or really stuff like that. It's all the stories of all the people that have ever played it, and all the people that worked on it, contributed to it, and even everybody that bought it. Honestly, everybody has their own experiences with these games, and everyone has their own story to tell, and they've got their own things that they've gotten out of it. Whether you want to do like a deep analysis of the game, or if you just want to sit back and play it for fun, it's just a really nice thing to kind of wrap up the book with, and it's probably where I'm going to wrap this video up to. So anyway guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, or if you didn't, please let me know in the comments below, and have a great day.